Good evening, everyone. And so this one is an event organized by Trivikram, Mr. Govind Chaturvedi's Creators Legal and Lawyers Club India. I'll first of all thank everyone who has come and joined us on a Sunday evening. And these are troubled times. We are trying to make a bit through these webinars and in lectures by panelists like Mr. Naganand. And we are happy to see so much of you joining us every week, in every session. So I've been given the duty to introduce the session today. So I'll just do it very briefly. I just wanted to tell everyone why we have organized this session today. So there are basically three reasons. First being my interest in constitution and history. So like many of you who have joined us, I have also been a very keen learner of the history and the constitution, not only of India, also of the other countries. So I've been reading a lot about them. Secondly, this session is also a tribute to Mr. Gyan Shankar Shukla, who passed away due to COVID on 28th April. He was my mentor, one of the best teachers I've ever had, and one of his favorite subject was constitution. And the last thing that he taught me was the chapter of equality and reservations. So that was left in the half, I guess. So I always wanted someone to come up and teach us reservations. And it's a very it's not a topic that is technical like evidence or IPC or CRPC. It's something that touches us all. It goes to the roots of India, to all the people, and how it came to be. We just think that reservation is a good thing or a bad thing. It should be there, should not be there. But there's a lot that went into it. A lot of people debated on it, on different kinds of articles, on untouchability, on equality, on titles, everything. There was such a lot of debate, and on reservation also by our forefathers like Jagjeevan Babu, Mr. Swaroop, Mr. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, and so many more. The third reason, because we have a very fine gentleman today who's going to teach us who's going to deliver the lecture today, senior advocate S.S. Naganandji. And I'll request Trivikram to introduce sir to people, and after that we'll start. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raghav. I deem it a privilege to introduce eminent lawyer like Shri Sondekoppa Sundaraswamy Naganand. Sir is only called as SS Naganand. Sir is a gold medalist in law from SJRC College, Bengaluru. And sir also holds one more gold medal, the qualified chartered accountant. So he has obtained this national level gold medal also. Sir has been practicing for more than 3 decades now, and he is designated as a senior advocate by the Honorable High Court of Karnataka. Sir, in his 3 decades career, has handled number of cases covering various facets of law. And I was also very lucky to work with Sir along with my senior in one of the cases, that is Anbalgan versus State of Karnataka, which is a reported judgment. It was before the divisional Honorable High Court. It was before the divisional bench of our High Court. So it was a great learning curve at that point of time. Again, we are lucky to have Sir with us today. Sir, not taking much of your time, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Raghav, and thank you, Trivikram, Govind, and the rest of the lawyers INC that is hosting this event. I'll go straight headlong into the topic. The object of an exercise like this is to ensure that we are kept abreast of the latest developments in law. We are learning number of things that we ought to know as lawyers. And invariably, in the humdrum of our professional lives, we don't pay attention to many facets of law. And I firmly believe, and I've always believed, that knowledge is something which is absolutely, what shall I say, essential one. Every person who is in the learned profession of law has to keep himself or herself abreast of law. And the way of doing it is that the law is developing at such a fantastic pace. Therefore, we should never miss out a chance on learning. And that learning can come through reading of law reports, reading of articles, reading of new textbooks that come in. And most importantly, I consider that whenever a new legislation is made, reading of the basic law by studying in great detail the text of the law is the starting point for understanding and appreciating law and applying it in situations which arise. Today's topic is relating to reservation. Now, if you look at the provisions of the Constitution, you get reference to the concept of reservation in a few provisions. I would like to first make a reference to some of these provisions and draw your attention to them before I go into the nitty-gritty of the problem that arose. As all of us are aware, when India got independence, we were in an extremely primitive stage in terms of our economic standing, our social development, and the manner in which society had developed and given opportunities to the citizens to bloom and prosper in their respective fields. There was a serious lacuna. The country was ridden with a number of factions, number of religions, number of castes, number of tribes, and the whole country was in, if I can use the expression, a very primitive stage. It is at that stage that the constitution makers thought that they must have a modern constitution for India. And the Constituent Assembly, which was given the responsibility of drawing up the constitution, took up these cudgels and made a beautiful, wonderful document for all of us to have and to enjoy for posterity. Sri B.N. Rao and Sri Babasaheb Ambedkar were the two main proponents who did quite a bit of the drafting of the constitution. And the preamble of the constitution says, "We, the people of India, hereby solemnly resolve to constitute India into a sovereign, socialistic, democratic republic." That was what was there. The word secular was added in the 1977 amendment to the Constitution. Therefore, there is the 42nd Amendment, the infamous 42nd Amendment. Why I say infamous is because it came during the emergency period. Now, this is the background of the preamble to the Constitution. Now, there are 2 or 3 important articles from where we start the discussion about reservation. Article 14 simply provides in very simple terms. It's a, what shall I say, it's a harmless article if you can use that expression. But at the same time, it's one of the shortest articles in the Constitution, but it has received the maximum number of pages when it comes to interpretation of this article. The article simply says, the state shall not deny to any person equality before the law or the equal protection of laws within the territory of India. So in other words, everybody is to be treated equally. Now, what happens if somebody is unequal? Take the case, a mother has got 2 children. One child is unfortunately blind and the other child is hale and hearty. What does the mother do? It's a natural human tendency and the motherly instinct that the mother will always look at the child who has that the serious disability of blindness and treat that child with greater care and greater love and affection. Now, after providing in Article 14, Article 15 immediately follows by saying, there shall be a prohibition of discrimination on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. So these factors were identified and said that on these factors, no one shall be discriminated. So this also is a fairly straightforward article till we come to the first amendment to the Constitution. In 1951, a provision was added as subsection 4. And subsection 4 says, nothing in this article shall prevent the state from making any special provision for the advancement of any socially and educationally backward classes of citizens or for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. So this is the first of the provisions which came very shortly after the Constitution, very first amendment that came. So this attempted to provide that the state will be entitled to make a special provision in so far as three categories: education, socially, educationally backward classes, scheduled castes, and scheduled tribes. Now, the object, if you look at Article 46 of the Constitution, in Part 4, which is Directive Principles of State Policy, you will find article which says the state shall promote with special care the educational, economic interests of the weaker sections of the people, and in particular of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and shall protect them from social injustice and all forms of exploitation. Now, there was a time when a scheduled caste person was not allowed to mix with other human beings in this country. There was a time when there was a category of persons who were treated as untouchables, whom Mahatma Gandhi called as Harijans. They were not allowed to come into a village. They could not draw water from the village well. This was the state of affairs which the British tolerated for all 200 years. And they did nothing about it except go and criticize afterwards and during the rule also. They did no social reform at all. They were Indian social reformers who came about and said, no, this should not be so. Now they are socially, economically weak and backward. I'm just giving one example because no opportunities were available. They couldn't go to school. They couldn't go to have their children go to education. And if they did get educated by some strange means, like Baba Sahib got himself educated, he was a scheduled caste person, as all of us are aware. He got educated and went abroad, and those opportunities are not available to large sections of the society. Therefore, this directive principles of state policy became important. Now, so this provision was made relating to special provisions. That is, this equality clause had an exception. That exception was special provisions for the socially and educationally backward classes, etc. Now we come to another situation where 20 years later, it became necessary to introduce some more amendments 20 or 25 years later. That was the subsection 5 of section article 14, sub-article 5 was introduced. And that came about in the 93rd amendment of the Constitution on 20th January 2006. Now the object of this was, it introduced new sub-article 5, and it provided for the reservation for scheduled caste, backward classes, and scheduled tribes, and socially, economically, educationally backward classes also. And in what they provided was, it added and said that the state can make a provision so far as admission to colleges are concerned. And of course, they made an exception. Exception was colleges which were privately owned and publicly owned, it would cover. But colleges and institutions which are run by minority, which was guaranteed by Article 31 of the Constitution, they excluded. So this amendment came about in 2006. Then you go to sub-article 6 of same Article 15, which provided for reservations for economically weaker sections. And this was in addition to the reservation that was contemplated in sub-articles 4 and 5. And they added a rider there to say that this economically weaker section reservation shall not exceed 10% of the reservation done for SC, STs, etc. So in other words, this a sub kind of a classification was carved out of this. This is Article 15. Now Article 15 is general, but when it comes to Article 16, this provides for, because you know, India, the state is a large employer. And now by the definition of state to include all instrumentalities of state, what has happened is the largest employer in the country is the state and its instrumentalities. So the state guaranteed to everybody equality of opportunity in matters of public employment. It provided there shall be equality of opportunity for all citizens in matters relating to employment or appointment to any office under the state. Then no citizen shall be discriminated, etc. Nothing in this article shall prevent Parliament from making any law prescribing in regard to a class or classes of employment a state as to residence within the state prior to such employment or appointment. So in other words, the law-making power was conferred. Now, this article of sub-article 4 also provided that this article shall not prevent the state from making a provision for reservation of appointments or posts in favor of any backward class of citizens, which in the opinion of the state is not adequately represented in the services. Now we have a different category. You have scheduled caste. I'll come to the provisions relating to nomination of scheduled caste, etc. You have scheduled tribes. Then you have socially and economically backward, educationally backward. And now you have one more category to say backward class. So you have another backward class that the law is contemplating. Now, in this article, till 1977, it remained in that fashion. And in 1977, sub-article 4A was added. Sorry, it was not in 77, but it is in 95. Article 4A provided that the state, nothing in this article shall prevent the state from making any provision in matters relating to promotion of any class on classes of posts and services under the state, scheduled caste, etc. Now, the question had arisen before the Supreme Court as to whether promotion is also something that is governed or no. And in Indra Swani's case, the Supreme Court had occasion to deal with this aspect. I will touch on that a little later. Therefore, this constitution amendment came about to say that in matters relating to promotion also, there is a possibility of some kind of a preference to be given to them. Then we come to two more articles which came about in the 81st amendment to the Constitution from 9/6/2000. The 81st amendment introduced sub-article 4B and sub-article 6. In 4B, there was a provision which related to certain provision to be made for certain other classes of people. And in sub-article 6, it provided for economically weaker sections, that just as it was done in sub-article 6 of article 15, such a provision was also made. So in other words, the framework, the foundation is contained in these provisions. Now, you must go to a completely different section, different part of the Constitution to understand what exactly did the lawmakers do pursuant to these powers. You'll have to refer to part number 16, which talks of special provisions. Now, in part number 16, which commences from article 330 right up to 342A, number of provisions are made. The most contentious provisions are not relating to representation in parliament. Of course, there has been some litigation relating to that, but not much. That is, the law provided that both in parliament and in the state assemblies, a certain percentage of the seats of those members will be reserved for categories and classes of scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, etc. So these articles simply provided from article 330 onwards, 335, 330, up to 335, this reservation provisions were made. In other words, depending upon what the population percentage is of these categories of people in those areas, a reservation was made, and it also empowered that certain seats should be reserved exclusively for contest by members of that particular class or community. There's no quarrel with that. But the next provision, Article 338, it provided for a National Commission for Scheduled Castes. And a similar provision was added in 338A relating to the setting up of a National Commission for Scheduled Tribes. These amendments came about in the 89th Amendment on 19th of February 2004. So in other words, the law envisaged that you could give some preference. The law said that everybody shall be treated equally, but the equal treatment does not take away the rights and powers of the legislature to make special provisions. And how do they make those special provisions? They need data and information. So a National Commission was contemplated in the 2004 enactment. Now we come to several years thereafter. Article 338B, a similar provision was introduced for backward classes. And this was by the 102nd Amendment to the Constitution, which came into force on 11/8/18. Now you see, scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, they fall in a different category, whereas socially and economically backward category is a different category which is being now carved out. So in other words, the quantum, the number of categories of people for whom reservation has to be made is going on increasing. It went up to scheduled castes, then scheduled tribes, then economically weaker sections, then socially and educationally weaker sections, then this backward classes. Now, this was the bone of contention in many cases, and I shall deal with it finally. Now we have to refer to two more articles, Articles 341 and 342. Now these two articles relate to presidential declarations to be made. In other words, there is a commission that is set up which examines facts, and it goes into the composition of the population, the state of backwardness of many of these people, and what kind of protection is necessary, and how much is their representation in the state sector. That's also a very important facet of it. All of this is done, and thereafter the president issues a declaration or a proclamation with a list to say that these are the scheduled castes, these are the scheduled tribes, and this declaration has come up for challenge, and courts have, the Supreme Court has said so repeatedly, that this declaration is something which is final and it is not open for judicial review. Therefore, once the government takes that decision, it becomes final. In fact, in the parliamentary debates, which is referred to in the latest judgment of the Supreme Court, which I'm going to refer to a little later, they extract a small portion of a exchange that took place in the Constituent Assembly, when some member asked, you have said that this shall be, the backward classes shall be identified. What is the basis? What do you mean by backward class? So Ambedkar gave a very crisp reply to say, backward classes are those classes and communities of people whom the government decides are backward. Now, this was an oversimplistic answer, because today we are now seeing all of us want the tag of backward class. We are standing in a line, call me backward, I am backward socially, I am backward economically, I am backward linguistically, I am minority linguistically, I am minority linguistic in my own state. Now, this is what is happening. And Ambedkar, in his innocence, said what the government decides. Now, this has come up for a number of discussions. And finally, one more article is the last article in this part number 16, which deals with socially, economically backward classes. Now, what is the socially, economically backward classes, and how the notification should be made by the president? This article has been subject matter of a very elaborate consideration in the current latest judgment of the Supreme Court. Now, I mentioned to you that these reservations are to be based on some objective data that has to be unearthed and placed before the government. And for that purpose, Mr. B.P. Mandal was appointed to go into this issue and submit a report. So Mr. Mandal submitted a report, and based on that, number of actions were taken by the government. Now, these actions were questioned and ultimately came up for consideration before the Supreme Court in that famous judgment of Indira Swani, which is reported in AIR 1993 Supreme Court 477, and the equivalent is 1992 Supplement Volume 3 Supreme Court Cases 217. 9 judges of the Supreme Court, presided over by Chief Justice Kania, dealt with this issue, and number of issues that arose for consideration in that case. And the judgment is a very elaborate judgment where many issues were gone into, and the court framed several issues. One issue was, is this reservation constitutionally valid? Does it bring about any kind of a reverse discrimination in depriving normal citizens of their legal rights by carving out something for a particular class and category? You know, if I am a general merit category person, and if I applied to the medical college, I probably would have got a seat if I had 85% marks. But if 50% of the seats were taken away and reserved for different categories of persons in these scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, other backward classes, and socially, economically weaker backward sections of the society, then what will happen is that instead of my cutoff marks being 85% for general merit, the cutoff marks for me will go to 95%. In other words, the scope of the chances of a general merit candidate getting seats in educational institutions and in employment to government kept on decreasing in terms, and the standards that were set went on increasing. It's an inverse thing that happened because there were some categories which had to be reserved for them. Now, one of the issues that arose in this case was also among these communities, there is a section of society which is very, very highly developed community. And in the case of those, they are economically very strong. Now take the case of a second or third generation scheduled caste person whose parents have started a big industry, and that person has got a 100 crore income, his father, his family. He still, because of the chance of his birth, happens to be categorized as a scheduled caste, and therefore he or she is entitled to all the privileges that are available to a person who really is deserving. So this issue also came up before the Indira Swani's case, where the Supreme Court pointed out and said that there is a creamy layer in this reserved category. And they pointed out that this creamy layer, for example, a person who is economically advanced, or a person whose family fortunately has had the benefit of a good education, and he is a third generation college graduate. Whereas there is another category who's living in the next house in the same village. His 5 generations have never seen a school. All of them are illiterate, and they are all working as menial labor. And he is also belonging to the same caste. Then what happens? Who has to get the preference? Who has to get the priority? To avoid this anomaly, Supreme Court contemplated the idea of a creamy layer. Now, this is one other issue that came up before the Supreme Court in this category. The third and the most important issue that they dealt with was, what is the extent of the percentage of reservation that you could have? Because the Constitution is silent. Neither Article 14, 15 or 16 provide that you can reserve a certain percentage. Supposing tomorrow the government decides that 90% of the jobs will be reserved for scheduled caste persons, and they say that it is necessary, we have to encourage scheduled caste people and other backward classes also, so only 10% will be reserved for general merit. Is that possible? Is that permissible? In that context, question number 6 in the Indira Swani's judgment, those of you who have the patience to read that judgment will find the question number 6 which deals with this aspect. And all the judges except Justice Ratnavel Pandian, who was the lone dissenter in that judgment, and incidentally he happened to belong to the scheduled caste. Now in such a case, he is the only one who dissented, and he said, no, this creamy layer is not also possible. And he also said, why should we lay down any upper cap on this 50%? It is ultimately for Parliament to take a decision and the President to make an order. Therefore, we should not have any limit. The article is silent. Therefore, there should be no limit. But the majority of the judges, though there are several judgments, some are concurring, some are elaborating, and some are explaining their point of view, all of them came to the conclusion that this 50% is a rule which is inviolable. And this is a judgment of 9 judges. Now, this issue, it attained a quietus at that stage, and everybody accepted it, and the laws were all made in terms of it. Now, some years later, a question arose as to whether the view taken in Indira Swani's case is in consonance with the constitutional developments as the country faces, because one cliche which everybody uses is that the Constitution is a living document. You have to interpret it in such a way that it gives life into the provision. After all, words are just empty words unless they are filled with life. That's the argument of most progressive thinking judges. Therefore, they have interpreted Article 14, the right to equality, and given it many, many facets. The second dimension, the third dimension, the non-arbitrariness, audi alteram partem, right to be heard, right not to be discriminated. All of this is encompassed in that one line article of 14. Similar way, they said, no, no, this judgment requires reconsideration. A constitution bench in M. Nagaraj case, which is 2006, 8 Supreme Court cases, 212, went into this, and in again a detailed judgment, they came to the conclusion that Indra Swani's case still holds the field and that there is nothing to be done so far as this is concerned. Now, so in other words, 92 to 2006, Indra Swani held the field. 2006, it was reiterated by a constitution bench. And in spite of it, politicians are politicians. For votes, they will do anything. And so what they did was, in Maharashtra, they set up a Gaikwad commission. And there was a clamor that the Marathas, who are the traditional, if you can use a foreign term, as the aboriginal, the original Maratha person who was born, brought up and had for 5-6 generations in that state, in the hinterland, he is called a Maratha. Now, in the case of Marathas, they said we want to reserve another 16% for different categories of posts and also educational institutions. So in other words, by this process, the total percentage of reservation, if you take into account the scheduled caste, the scheduled tribes, and other socially, economically backward persons, and in which they brought these Marathas into consideration, the reservation would exceed 50%, which in question number 6, Indra Swani said it can't be done. The reservation has to be limited to 50%. Now, this was questioned before the Supreme Court. And in a recent judgment of the Supreme Court, a constitution bench, where the leading judgment is delivered by Justice Ashok Bhushan, and this judgment was delivered a few days ago on the 5th of May 2020-21, this year, just about 4 or 5 days ago. Now, it's also a very elaborate judgment which runs into some 565 pages. The leading judgment is authored by, there are 2 leading judgments in this case. One is authored by Justice Ashok Bhushan, and with him, Justice Abdul Nazir concurred. The other judgment is authored by Justice Ravindra Bhatt, and in his judgment, with his judgment, 3 judges concurred: Justice Nageshwar Rao, Justice Hemant Gupta. So, in other words, there are 2 judgments, and in 2 different parts there is concurrence. In other words, I will simplify it. There were 6 questions that were formulated by the court to answer in this judgment. First question is Indra Swani valid still? Does it require re-examination, or does it require reference to a larger bench? The second one is there additional reservation over 50% permitted after Indra Swani? Because Indra Swani said cap is 50%, you can't have more. The cap contained a rider which said that in extraordinary circumstances and in far-flung areas of the state, it could go up. So the state argued in this case that this is one such extraordinary circumstance which is recognized in Indra Swani. Therefore, you should sustain this increase so far as Marathas are concerned. The other aspect was, what is the scope of Article 342A? Now, 342A, as I mentioned, contains a provision. If you want me to just sort of, read it, that may be useful for us to read that provision. I will just take it. It's a very simple article. It says, the president may, with respect to any state or union territories, where it is a state, after consultation with the governor thereof, by public notification, specify the socially and educationally backward classes, which shall for the purposes of this constitution be deemed to be socially and educationally backward classes in relation to the state or union territory, as the case may be. So it's first power given to the president, and if it is a state with the governor, to declare and specify the socially, educationally backward class. That's exactly what was done in this case. They declared the Marathas to be such a backward class. And sub-article 2, Parliament may by law include in or exclude from the central list of socially and educationally backward classes specified in a notification under clause 1, any socially and educationally backward class, but same as aforesaid, a notification issued under said clause shall not be varied by any subsequent notification. So the argument here was that the second subarticle is talking of a central list, which means that this central list is only going to apply to reservations in the case of institutions and employment by the central government, and under all legislations falling under list 1 of the 7th schedule to the Constitution. As all of us are aware, the 7th schedule to the Constitution contains legislative powers. It has 3 lists. List 1 is the union list, where the central government parliament can make law. List 2 is the state list, where the state legislature can make the law. List 3 is the concurrent list, in which both categories, that is parliament as also the state legislatures, can make the law. So the argument was that this list which they are talking about is the list in the 7th schedule to the Constitution. So there was a big debate on that. The number of questions that were formulated includes this. The scope of Article 342A, what does it encompass? Does it still vest in the state government the power to issue a notification to designate certain category of people as socially and economically backward classes? That is one important factor which fell for consideration. The next one was what is the effect of the 102nd Amendment to the Constitution? Is it constitutionally valid? And last one was whether Article 342A denudes the states of the power to make a declaration relating to the list. Now, if you look at this judgment, it's a very elaborately analyzed judgment. And I must say that lawyers have a penchant to trouble the court with all sorts of arguments, with greatest respect to lawyers who appeared in those cases. From page number 107 to page number 170 in this judgment, that means nearly 63 pages of the judgment is devoted to only one question as to whether Indra Swani validity is the law still valid declared in Indra Swani? Does it require reconsideration? Elaborate contentions are urged, and each and every sentence in the judgment is analyzed. And there is a big table that is given in the judgment also to say what are the contention, what is the decision, etc. And finally, the court comes to the conclusion in page 115 that Indra Swani is correctly decided and does not merit any kind of revisitation. Now, there are several principles of law on which this was looked into. One argument was stare decisis. Now, stare decisis means that if a judgment has held the field for a long period of time, should that judgment be upset on account of a new thinking, so that the law which was settled and standing for so many years will get unsettled? That was one of the points. So the court said, this is a last court. Therefore, in the last court, we are not saying that we will not look at the law at all. We look at the law. But the law declared in Indra Swani was by a bench of 9 judges. So how can a bench of 5 judges relook at it and say that that is wrongly decided? The only thing that they could have done is they could have placed it before the Chief Justice to entertain a doubt and say that because of the doubt that we have entertained, court may consider whether this matter has to go to a larger bench or no. Anyway, the stare decisis rule was also examined and turned down. One of the arguments was that this 50% rule, what is the object of the 50% rule? This issue was not actually properly considered by the Indra Swani's case. And a beautiful passage they extract in this at page 148 of Justice Ravindran in one earlier judgment reported in 2008, 6 SCC, page 1, where Ashok Kumar's case versus Union of India, the Justice Ravindran had pointed out in this judgment in the Supreme Court that when the Constitution was made, this was a temporary measure. Now, this temporary measure has continued now for 70 years plus. How long will temporary measure continue? And in that context, they said that we should uphold the validity because it was a temporary measure. And till this happens, till the country is fully progressed, this should continue. Of course, they didn't say that in the judgment, but that was the justification. Then elaborate discussion about Article 141 prevails. Article 141, as we are all aware, deals with the law declared by the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's ruling being binding on every court and authority in the country. So they said that is binding on everybody and continues to hold the field. One other point which I mentioned little earlier was, in Indira Swani's case, there was an extraordinary situation which they provided as an exception, where the percentage could go up to beyond 50%. And they gave one example as a far-flung areas, etc. There was a lot of debate on that. And finally, the court came to the conclusion that in this case, that exception was not available. And relying on stare decisis, they held that Indira Swani judgment merits no interference. Now they come to the question, this is a discussion on the first 3 questions in that judgment. They come to the question whether Marathas required the decision to put Marathas in this other backward classes, is it justified on the facts? Now in that, there is an elaborate discussion about the decision taken in by that Gaikwad Commission, on the basis of which government took the decision. Now the argument of the state was, look here, this is like a presidential declaration. It is over judicial review. You can't review it. You cannot look into it. You cannot say whether the government has correctly done it or no. So a lot of discussion has flown on that point. And that famous decision of barium chemicals, which we are all familiar with, which arose in one of the first company law cases, AIR 1967 Supreme Court 295, 67 Supreme Court 295. They deal with this aspect in para 269 of this judgment and come to the conclusion that courts can always review every action, and if the government has not taken note of what is required to be taken note of, the court has every right to examine. After this preamble, the court goes on to examine the factual aspects, and a very interesting discussion takes place. I think this is worth reading, because they look into this Gaikwad committee report and they point out that this committee has done exactly the opposite of what all commissions and committees had did in the past, right from the time the constitution was formed. They examined the data that was available and found that Marathas were the most prominent class of people in holding political office. More than 70% of MLAs were Marathas. More than 60% of MLAs, other elected bodies were Marathas. And the number of representations they had in state service far exceeded every other community, if you take that community individually. And this Gaikwad committee report simply brushed all that aside and put some statistics and came to the conclusion that Marathas are deserving of being classified as a backward class. And the data that was used by the Gaikwad Commission itself was looked into by the Supreme Court, and they commented in page 258 that the adequacy of representation was wrongly understood by the Commission. So in other words, Marathas on data available could not have been construed as backward classes. So the court concluded that they were the so-called justification to treat them as backward class was completely unjustified from the material that was available on record. And in para 281 at page 328, the court points out how today there is a clamor among different castes and communities to be declared as backward. Everybody wants to declare themselves as backward. And why do they want that to be declared as backward? Because they are going to get the benefit of so many of these provisions. Then the next question that arose, this concludes the first part of the discussion. The first part of the discussion related to Indira Swani, the method in which Gaikwad was examined, and the conclusions that are arrived at, and the majority, the leading judgment, I would call it, of Justice Ashok Bhushan and Justice Nazir. On these 3 points, there is a concurrence on these points by all the judges. All the judges reached the same conclusion. Now, there is one more aspect that fell for consideration, and that consideration was that if you look at Article 342A. 342A talks of the right to draw up a list, and it also refers to a central list. So this judgment of Justice Ashok Bhushan contains an elaborate discussion on what is the method of interpretation of constitution, and this in Samskrita they call it charvita charvanam, means what you've already chewed, you go on chewing again and again and again. This principle that parliamentary debates are admissible for construction of any statute, including the constitution, has been the subject matter of any number of judgments, not one or two. You just look up, any junior will tell you, sir, there are at least 10 judgments on this. GP Singh on interpretation of statutes will also give you a list of cases where Supreme Court laid down this. But still, the issue is debated by leading counsel before the Supreme Court to say whether you should look at that parliamentary debate. Why should you look at that? It's unnecessarily raising a point which is well settled, and there's nothing to depart from that. So the court has to take the trouble of looking into all these judgments, looking into GP Singh, looking into Benyan, looking into various international authorities which deal with interpretation of the constitution, and finally come to the conclusion that debates in parliament are admissible in evidence and can construe and be given some effect in the interpretation of the constitution itself. Now, then they go to the actual examination of the nuts and bolts of this very short section, and they say purposive interpretation. What should be the object of the provision should be gathered from the words used. That is the golden rule. But the purposive construction is you must look at the object which was sought to be achieved and then interpret the constitution. Now, the question arose, they said that why should Article 342A take away the power of the states to make its own list? By an interpretation, you are actually taking away the power. This cannot be permitted. The power is vested in the state government, and the state has every power. And the judgment of Justice Ashok Bhushan deals with this question of what is the central list and why do they call it a central list. And on that ground, they come to the conclusion that the Article 342A is something which does not vest power which does vest power. Justice Ashok Bhushan's judgment comes to the conclusion that the central government does not have the power to amend the state list. It is the state which is absolute power. That's the conclusion. Now, Justice Nageshwar Rao comes to the conclusion, and Justice Hemant Gupta also concurs with that. But Justice Bhatt writes a very, very crisp and a beautiful judgment, which begins at page 438. He concurs with Justice Ashok Bhushan's judgment on the first 3 points. And then an elaborate consideration of the constitutional scheme is there. And Article 102 amendment LIDT is considered, and the court upholds that. And also this conclusion on Article 342A is something which is not accepted. And in the federal structure, what should happen is a thing. And finally, at page 565, conclusions are reached. Now, this is the sum and substance of the latest judgment which deals with it. I think the takeaway from all this to come to some kind of a conclusion on the law of reservation is that reservation has come to stay, though it was a temporary measure. How long more it will continue is a matter for Parliament, and that is a matter for politics. And when it will, if at all it will be done, we don't know. But today the country is in a stage where everybody wants to be classed as backward class because they want a pie of the pie that is being thrown by government in the form of employment in the state sector, plus also more importantly, an entry into higher educational institutions where it is becoming more and more difficult for our young people to get admission. Now, this is the background of this legislation that has been there. One other aspect that we need to look at is, there is one more issue that has come up for consideration and has been the subject matter of more than one decision. In the famous judgment of Pavitra 1 and Pavitra 2, which all of us have heard of, the Supreme Court had to grapple with the right of promotion in among the scheduled caste persons. Now, what happened was that it was pointed out to the court that the total number of promotees of scheduled castes was higher than what they were entitled to. So the court said that higher promotion is not correct. Therefore, you rework the quota promotion rule right from 1978. And that led to a spate of litigation, a new legislation that was made, and the Supreme Court carved out some special class for them and said that in the case of those promotees who have held promotee posts in excess of what was entitled, if they are found to have been wrongly promoted, you create a supernumerary post for them and allow them to continue till they retire. In other words, you get a benefit wrongly, Supreme Court holds it to be wrong. Thereafter, it says that, all right, we'll rework. And those who have been, the general merit candidates who have been deprived of promotion because of excess promotion among the reserved categories, they will now get their promotion on reworking, but the promotees will continue to hold those positions, and directed the government to create a supernumerary position. Now, this is so far as the Pavitra 1 and 2 are concerned. So I think in conclusion, I would say that the law of reservation has had a checkered career, but the law seems to be now well settled right from 1992, at least constitutionally, that it is possible for the state to reserve, not only reserve in the manner of admission to educational institutions, but also in the matter of employment. One other aspect which has come up for consideration in number of judgments, including the famous judgment in TMA Pai's case, TMA Pai Foundation case. You know, educational institutions run by minority institutions. What should be the position so far as they are concerned? Because you saw that in Article 15, sub-article 5, it made an exception and said that minority college institutions you cannot control in this manner, prescribe anything. That is because Article 31 gives some special protection to minorities. Now, it has often come up for consideration. Well, if minority educational institution, which is set up by a religious minority or a linguistic minority, for example, this TMA Pai was declared in a judgment in which my senior had appeared for the TMA Pai Foundation, where they contended that they were linguistic minority in the state of Karnataka because they were Konkani speaking, the Pais, and therefore they set up this. But they were engaged in secular education. They were not engaged in Konkani education or education of their culture. But the Supreme Court interpreted it to mean that, well, if they have set it up as a minority institution, their protection still continues to hold the field so far as they are concerned. But in Islamic Association case and two other cases where Supreme Court had occasion to see that the state can also have some say in it, and these minority institutions can also be regulated in some manner, because those are the capitation fee cases, which all of us are familiar with. In the Supreme Court finally made a rule that even minority institutions for whom the state cannot allocate, they have to have their own examination. It's called ComEd K. And this ComEd K examination is an examination by minority institutions to find out the relative merits, because the Supreme Court said, maybe you're a minority institution and you may not be, the state may not be able to allocate seats. But nevertheless, when you take admission, there was two streams. Under the abolition of capitation legislation, there were some seats in minority institutions which were also to be put into the state pool, which was entirely merit-based. Merit come reservation, of course. There was merit. There was an examination conducted by the state called CET, Common Entrance Examination. And in that CET, there would be ranking. And when it comes to allocation to state-owned colleges for admission, the reservation roster was followed and the 50% rule was always applied. But when it comes to those colleges which are not in the state sector, this next regulation was that they must also have a competitive examination, and based on the marks obtained in that, admissions should be made to those educational institutions. So I think this is one facet of the reservation law which has worked in India so far as education field is concerned. And so far as the employment field is concerned, I think the position is very clear, and I don't see in the near horizon anywhere that the government is going to think of abolishing any reservation, and they are now thinking of increasing reservation. And this is a serious issue for consideration. We are losing a lot of young people in this country. Young and bright minds feel that there is no hope for them in this country because they have no avenues. Only if they are standing on their own feet doing their own business they can succeed. But it's not possible to do that. And in every field, this is a feeling of stifling that the young people are feeling. So we are losing a hell of a lot of young people to outside foreign countries. So I think it's time that very pragmatically this issue looked at. But having regard to the vote bank of these bodies, in my view, I don't think the government is ever going to look at this because it's too big a chance for them to take. The minute you reduce the reservation, you definitely will feel the government feels that the voter is not going to vote for you. And that's exactly their thinking at the time being. Whether this is justified or not, there have been commissions. The law provides for two types of commission: National Commission in Article 338A for scheduled caste, one more for scheduled tribe, a separate one for backward classes. All of these commissions are looking into data. But data is always a very dubious thing. You can work it in any way you want. That's what exactly happened in the Gaikwad Commission report, where the Supreme Court judicially reviewing it found that they reached a perverse consideration, a perverse result on data which could be interpreted in exactly the opposite manner. So I think this is the position so far as the law of reservation in India is concerned, as it stands today. Thank you very much for your patient hearing, and if there's any questions, we can maybe try to tackle them in the next few minutes. Thanks.
Raghav?
Yeah, sorry, I could not unmute myself for a second. Thank you so much, sir. This was such an energetic and heavy content that you delivered. So many judgments and so many things articulated so well for people. It's going to be a something added to their asset, and especially for those who are going for competitive examinations. This much details into the judgments, even the paragraph numbers, and what to quote, what not to. This is really going to help. Thank you so much. I hope everyone enjoyed. We'll take your questions now. We have a lot of questions, although I thought that the lecture was so well done that there would be no space for questions, but we do have participants who are not going to let us go right now. So Govind, if you have questions, you can start with your questions.
I think I have first let Mr. Trivikram sir ask his question. I'll go after him, or you can go after him. I'll go last. Don't worry. So whoever wants to go first, either one of you, please.
All right, Trivikram, if you have questions.
Yeah, thank you, Raghav. Once again, thank you, sir, for a very erudite presentation. We have one question by Mr. Kaushik Subramania. His question is, how do we reconcile Jai Shri Lakshman Rao judgment with federalism?
I think, there's an elaborate discussion on federalism in this latest judgment also. Now, one of the main arguments that were addressed was that if you interpret Article 342A in this manner, federalism is a basic structure of the Constitution. And if you interpret it in this manner, that 342A takes away the power of the state even to make that list, because it is talking of consultation and not concurrence. But the majority judgment seems to take the view, well, federalism as a theory, as a constitutional theory is one thing. But when the law is speaking in certain words, we need to interpret those words that are there in the Constitution. We can't, interpret it in theory. I remember one more judgment of Justice Venkatramaya in Hext Pharmaceuticals case, where the question was, a sales tax is an indirect tax. An indirect tax, normally, the person who is liable to pay the tax can collect it from the buyer. So in this case, they put a restriction and said that this turnover tax, which was levied on the manufacturer or seller, he cannot collect this tax. So the argument was, all indirect taxes have to be collected. Why only this collection? Therefore, it's arbitrary. And there's elaborate discussion to say there is a difference between an economic theory and a practical interpretation of a law. So I think going by the word of the law, if it results in the power of the states getting curtailed, well, the law is made by Parliament. Parliament comprises the representatives of the people. And to make that law, the Constitution has given them the authority. So either the law is unconstitutional because of some violation of some provision of law, or it is within the provisions of law. So this concept of federalism, I don't think should cloud the decision-making process and the interpretation of a special provision. In fact, this has been elaborately considered in this judgment also, when Justice Ashok Bhushan has dealt with this. Yeah.
I have one more question, sir, by Mr. B.M. Arun. Sir, very pleasant to hear you. My question is, at present, there is no creamy layer concept in SC and ST reservations. Because of that, within the reservation is cornered by few in the SC/ST community, including children of rich industrialists, professionals, including doctors, advocates, engineers, and also judges, to the detriment of most deserving in the same community. The most deserving are not getting benefits of the reservations, which is contrary to the constitutional scheme and the purpose of reservation. There has to be a creamy layer concept, and in another 15 to 20 years, the reservation can be relooked. What is your view?
I entirely agree. Creamy layer has to be there. It has to be looked into, but who is willing to look into it is the unfortunate question, you know. The elected government, they seem to think that if they make such a provision, then their votes are going to be lost. Now, you look at some of the SC/ST ministers that we have in our state. I won't name them. Their asset value is all are in excess of hundreds of crores of rupees. They belong to this community. Now, do you have to give them benefit? Some of them own aeroplanes. They're still scheduled caste. And they have to be given this benefit. Their children, grandchildren, everybody will get a special treatment in employment, special treatment in educational institutions. So I think it is completely wrong, you know. This has to be set right. There's no doubt about it that this has to be set right. I don't know when it will be done, but I think somewhere along the line it has to be done. The Constitution has recognized it. Indira Swani has said it.
So one more question by Mr. Nitish. The reservation invariably being caste-based, does it not violate Article 15, Subclause 1 in the present form?
This has been the subject matter of debate in all judgments challenging the constitutional validity. Indira Swani, earlier also, Nagaraj, and in the current judgment also. You see, the argument goes like this to say that it doesn't violate. It says that the Constitution, in the example I gave you, a mother has got a blind child, it has got a healthy child. What will it do? The mother will certainly give some extra preference and priority of her time for the blind child. No, the same concept is here now. There is a category of people who have been oppressed. By virtue of their caste, they have been oppressed. You see, particular castes, I know, you know, what pernicious practices were there. You know, it's just inhuman completely. That if a person of a particular caste was walking in front of a higher caste person house, he had to take out his footwear, put it on his head and walk across. This was the level that was there prevailing. Of course, it doesn't exist today. I believe, even in the villages, things have all changed. But what I'm saying is this the level of social discrimination against them. So initially it was required. But then in the determination of this process, in finding out who are the people who really deserve it, that is where the lawmakers are failing. That's where they're failing. They're failing in the implementation of a good idea. Now, for example, you know, they give a kind of a electricity subsidy in Delhi, they give. Now, anybody who consumes less than 100 units a month doesn't pay any electricity charge. Now, there are many rich people who own houses there who are not living there now. And if there's no consumption, all the rich people are getting the benefit of this, though they don't deserve it. But if you see a poor person who has only 2 lights in his house, his consumption will be less than 100 units a day, a month. Therefore, he is entitled to it. So that is where the problem is of implementation. Yeah.
think Mr. Raghav, you can take over. I think I missed to mention two things while introducing senior. He is the vice president of the commission of the jurists, and he is also the board of trustees, one among the board of trustees of Vedant Bharati. Sir is very active, and he has written two books also. I think I missed it out while introducing sir. Not worthy to mention it here. Yes, Raghav, over to you.
Thank you.
Govind, I think I'll just curate all the questions that we have on Facebook while you can take the questions that you have.
So should I go ahead?
Yes.
Okay. So I have 2-3 questions, sir. Sir, is it legally supported that there should be a temporary measure, or that reservation should be a temporary measure? So this is a question from Preksha Sharma. She's asking, is it legally supported that reservation should be a temporary measure, or if it is a permanent measure, then are there legal arguments for either side?
What is temporary is a question. I just now referred in my talk to the judgment of Justice Ravindran, where he specifically says this is a temporary measure, and that everybody says it's a temporary measure. You know, I heard that. I'll digress a little bit and share a joke with you. It's something which happened in court actually. You know, in the court of Chief Justice P.C. Jain, a matter was being heard. Mr. R.N. Narasimhamurthy was briefed in a matter. It had gone on the previous day, and the next day also he was waiting for the case. As soon as the case was called, he was sitting in court, but he did not stand up to argue. The case was called once, case was called twice. He just kept sitting. The court officer then mentioned to the judges that Mr. Narasimhamurthy is there. He didn't stand up. So then the judges asked him, Mr. Narasimhamurthy, I think you are appearing in this case. He said, yes, my lord, I am now blind and I am deaf because my instructing lawyer is not here, nothing that I can do. So the judges started laughing, and Justice P.C. Jain told him, Mr. Narasimhamurthy, are you aware of a concept of a muta marriage in Mohammedan law? So he said, yes, I know. It's a temporary marriage. So for that purpose, we'll temporarily request one of the juniors to come and sit by you and assist you. So you may please argue the case, because we know you are ready in this case and you will argue it. So that muta marriage is a temporary marriage. So what is temporary in the nation's history is what is important. 200 years after independence in America, they are still grappling with the question as to whether a black person needs to be shot in the head or should be shot in the leg if he is violent. And if it's a white person, they always have to shoot him in the leg. They cannot shoot him in the head. And 600 years later, the UK royalty is still thinking, what will happen if my progeny has got a brown color skin? Now, what do you do with these things? In the life of a nation, time is something, which is very stretchable. If the politicians think the time is not yet ripe, today is temporary. After all, we have got independence only for 70 years. There are countries which are independent for 200 years and they are still not finished. And in those countries, it took them 150 years to give adult franchise for women. So temporary, yes, but when that will end is something which only it is in the womb of time.
Okay, sir. Thank you. I think Mr. Sharma has gotten an answer. Second question is, sir, what over here Mr. Takshi Jain is saying is, these statewide regulations of reservations, but the statewide regulation of reservations, that state bodies can decide how much reservation is the need, leads to corruption. And M.R. Balaji versus State of Mysore is one such case where this took place, where they, if I'm referring to the same judgment, what she refers is when State of Mysore considered all communities except Brahmins backward socially and state-wise, and then the court said there is no definite spectrum to decide this. So this kind of leaves a room for corruption for the state agencies to do and consider where, because again in M.R. Balaji they call all communities except Brahmins backward. So
I think the answer to this is corruption can be of many kinds. Corruption is in the form of an enticement to voters. So this is one such corruption. Now you see, we are seeing now in this Panchamshali demand of the Lingayat community for backward class categorization in Karnataka state. I mean, the Lingayats are the most, progressive community that we have had. They are people, I think 60% of the ministerial berths are occupied by them. And more than 30% of the, let's say, legislative assembly members are from that community. And they are big businessmen, industrialists, millionaires, multi-millionaires. They have been judges. Majority, sometimes, at least 20 to 30 judges of the Karnataka High Court are from that community. But still, a section of that community says, you please give me this categorization. And what is it that the government is doing? It is trying to appease them by saying, we'll consider them. So this certainly is a form of corruption. Corruption need not necessarily mean taking money or bribe. This is corrupting the system. So I think it is right. But what to do? The power has to be rested in somebody. That's why I said, if you see in this judgment, there's one very beautiful, just one line answer he has given. Who is backward? You are not defined who is backward, was the question of one of the members. And Baba Sahib answered, who is a backward will have to be naturally decided by the state. And he assumed that the state will do it objectively. Even now in Gaikwad report, it is obvious that that report was a fabricated report. It was a report which was made to suit this Maratha community. And the court found it to be wrong. Balaji's case also same thing happened. So if an abuse takes place, thank God that we have courts and good lawyers like Trivikram and you.
I will now pass on the questions to Mr. Raghav Arora. Thank you, sir. Very well. Thank you, sir. Very interesting question. Very interesting answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Govind. So, sir, I have around 5 questions. I've clubbed many of them in single questions, whichever were related. So, the first question is about section 335, which talks about the efficiency of administration that should not be hindered because of reservations. The first question is that 335 says efficiency of administration should be maintained, but how is that made sure of? And is there an authority who keeps a check on it? And what is the relevance of 335? That is another question that a person has asked.
Now, this question postulates that anybody who is appointed in that reserved category is useless. Anybody who belongs to the reserved category and who is given an employment is below par. This is the presumption. Okay, this presumption is not correct, because I can give you the illustration of at least 3 judges of the Karnataka High Court who belong to the reserved category, but they were exemplary. They were far more equipped than any other judge of any other community. Okay, what I'm saying is that generally the trend is that they are below par. But there are always exceptions to that rule. And the object of this reservation is to bring them up. It is to ensure that somebody who's, let's say someone has had a problem and broken his leg and has been in hospital for 6 months without movement. What will you do? You'll give physiotherapy, Make sure that slowly and surely that person can start walking, moving his limbs. That is what the country is attempting to do with this category of people. They have been so much oppressed. In fact, I remember there was one boy from one community like this who was known to our family for a long time. And his father was the barber and also the piper in the village. So this boy didn't study much. And then afterwards, we told him that and he was doing nothing. So he was not even helping his father in his avocation of barber's job. So he's just roaming around. The father came and said, "Sir, please help him out." So we took him into our office. When he came, he knew nothing, means he was even shivering to stand in front of us. He could not come and stand in front of us. That was his mental condition. Today, by the opportunity that was given to him in our chambers, my father's chambers, of course, he is now, very comfortably placed. He's built 2 houses. He's married his daughters. He lives in a comfortable palatial house. He's got his own farm. How did that happen? It happened because of the opportunity that was given to him. And his intelligence was, I would say, average, not below average, but that average intelligence flowered into a fantastic entrepreneur. So this is what I'm saying, So everybody given the right opportunity will do it. So efficiency and the lack of performance of these people I do understand that there is a general complaint that these reserved category people are below par. They don't do what they're supposed to do, and their intelligence level is less than what others are. Naturally, it is like that because if you reduce the pass percentage for them to 40 or 35 and keep the pass percentage for recruitment at 60 for others, you will definitely see a change in the what shall we say, the intellectual performance. No? So I think this is a mixed bag. While it is true to some extent that the reserved category persons are not as good as the others, but at the same time there are always other cases also where they are far above the others. No solution.
Thank you, sir. So sorry to inject, but when you said how mentally crushed these people are, I was pulled back to one of the Constituent Assembly debates that I was reading, in which when there was a debate whether there should be reservations or not, and Baba Sahib Ambedkar and Mr. Jagjeevan Babu and Mr. Munda, they stood up and told the assembly through various examples why should reservations be there. So one of the examples that Mr. Munda came from the tribals to represent them in the Constituent Assembly. He told the assembly that one of his mates, his schoolmates, was getting married, and he wanted to ride a horse when the
Bharat.
when the Barat came. Yes, so he wanted to do that, and he did that along with few people, not the caste Hindus, only the people of his tribe. And when few of caste Hindus spotted him, the whole of the community came along. Not only banged, they killed the horse. They put that black thing on his face, and they burned the horse, the bride, and the bridegroom along with the horse.
Ooh.
And that created such a sensation in that area. I think he was telling about the UP area somewhere, and he was criticizing the governance of Mr. Pant, who was the then governor of the state. So that is how crushed people were, and that is why such topics are important to be discussed.
Yeah.
So moving on to the next question.
I just remembered one incident, and maybe people could read that speech is available. The speech, I have a dream, speech by Martin Luther King, the black nationalist leader who fought for the equality of the blacks in America. Yes. It's a very moving speech that he delivered. In fact, some years ago, I wrote an article about it. And in that article, I pointed out that, after so many years of independence, see, if in my house, I want to follow certain practice. Let us say I do not want any outsider to come into my kitchen. Okay, that's the rule I follow in my house. Nobody can find any fault with that, because I would like to live like that. But if I go to a public place, and if a person who doesn't belong to my community is sitting next to me, if I get up and go away when I'm having a meal, what does it mean? It means that, we don't actually care. Our beliefs are so steeply embedded in our hearts, that, we express it in such a way that the other person will feel offended. Whereas if you go back to philosophy, the greatest Indian philosophical background of Sanatan Dharma is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. It also says Tattvamasi, Aham Brahmasmi. What does all this mean? It means we are all one. There's only one spirit in all of us, and that spirit is divine. The same divinity is there in you and me. We preach all these things. We read all these Vedas and Purusha, these Shastras, and we read the Ramayana and everything. But nevertheless, when it comes to our practice, we live in a different world. We have compartmentalized our life. In Puja Room, we are one. In outside world, we are another one. That should not be so. You must feel compassion. You must feel love and affection for everybody. What difference does it make whether somebody is on one caste or another caste? It doesn't make any difference. But still, our society is like that. Slowly, it is changing. I now see it is changing, and hopefully it will, completely change. Yeah.
Right, sir. So moving on to the next question. one of the queries has asked that can you explain the reservations in promotions and the catch-up rule? And along with that, another query has asked, can you please tell us about horizontal and vertical reservations?
Now, this catch-up rule is like this. Sometimes reservation in promotion has come to stay after Indra Swani and the amendments and validity. Now, to what extent, that is helping is a different policy issue. So in reservation and promotion means certain number of posts are to be allocated. See, at every level in the post, there is supposing there are 10 posts of executive engineer. And from an assistant executive engineer, there is a promotion to executive engineer. And in executive engineer, if there are 10 posts, let's say 5 posts are reserved for each of these categories, all told together 5. Now, when promotion is taking place, if supposing they do not find a suitable candidate who can be promoted to executive engineer because of qualification, experience, years of service, and other things, then they promote somebody else. Now, that means what happens to this vacancy, which would have gone to reserved but didn't go. So there's a big debate about this catch-up rule in this judgment also, and to the Pavitra case judgment also, there is this discussion is there. So finally, what they said was that the catch-up rule has to be operated with reference to the number of vacancies that are there at the point of promotion, and not with the number of vacancies for the total number of posts. At the time of promotion, when promotions are being considered, how many posts were there, that many has to be filled up by the catch-up rule. That is what they say about the catch-up rule. What's the second part of the question?
So the second one is, can you please tell us about horizontal and vertical reservations?
No, I think, horizontal reservation and vertical reservations are, it means that is, you're looking at reservations at entry point and at higher levels, promotional posts. So I think it both means the same thing in the sense that horizontal reservation probably we could refer to at entry point. Vertical promotion is this promotional post reservation.
All right, sir. So we have few questions which are subjective because you've already shared so many insights on so many matters regarding reservation. So I'll club them together. Basically, the queries want to ask if it were you who could choose what the system of reservation could be in India and take us to a progressive point or progressive direction, how would you suggest we take up and implement reservations in India, if at all we should do it?
I would do it this way. What I would do is, I would lay down the criteria among that reserved category. Who are eligible? Caste is one factor. If you are belonging to a particular caste and that is declared as a scheduled caste, now inside that caste, if a person has to have the benefit of reservation, they must fulfill certain criteria. Now, if somebody in their house, the previous generation has graduated from college, I think the next generation should not get reservation. If somebody who's an income tax assessee and his or her family income is above, let us say, some threshold that you put, say 5 lakhs a year, then that person should not be eligible. Like this, you must lay down criteria and say that inside that community, who are the people who are most deserving, you must have criteria to identify them. Only if those criteria are met, that category of person should get reservation. If that criteria is not met, even though he may belong to that caste, he or she should not get reservation. That's how I would look at it. But they'll have to make detailed rules for this and give effect to it if the government accepts this.
Sir, at this point, I'll take the question from Dr. Shikhar, which comes from Advocate Roma Bhagat, which was the next part of the question that I asked earlier. And Dr. Shikhar says, I am typing on behalf of Advocate Roma, and reservations in theory are great, but implementation leaves a lot of scope. So we have the idea, we have a criteria, but how do we talk about implementation being done the way it should be done? And year after year, there are cases which come up because of lack of implementation. So what is the point?
Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, this very BK Pavitra case, if you see the number of times the matter has gone up and down, number of legislations, how many pages judges have had to write, one final decision, then a review, then a recall. then fresh judgment, then fresh law. It's interminable, you know. The reason being that this implementation stage is fraught with problems. In fact, currently I'm dealing with a matter for the High Court, appearing for the High Court in a case where the question of promotion has come up for consideration post the Pavitra case. The argument is that you must redo the entire promotions from 1978 because of this Pavitra case. Now, what is the effect of those things? What will happen to people who have already been promoted and who have now got to be, sent back to their original cadre? And implementation stage, and also I must frankly say that the judiciary has contributed in ample measure to the confusion also. If you see the judgments that they have delivered, it is somewhat difficult to reconcile many of the conclusions that they have reached. But judiciary has reached the conclusion. Therefore, the administrators have no option but to follow it. And in following it, they are failing second round, third round, fourth round litigation. There is a problem.
Correct.
It is a major problem. Yeah.
Sir, if we are not too delayed, can we take one or two more questions, because questions keep flowing in.
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead.
All right.
You're on vacation.
Right. Also, before taking any other question from the chat, I again was pulled back to one of the debates I was reading, where one of the members who followed Gandhiji's policy, he said that when we are talking about the structure of governance in India, we should start from below and narrow to broad. So that means a inverted pyramid. But the other people who were in the Constituent Assembly, they suggested that we go broader and from top to the bottom. So that means talking about the central governance and then going towards the panchayats and everything, but not giving them the kind of superiority like we have given to the center. But the inverse was what others suggested. So do you think if we would have a sort of system which Gandhiji proposed, that is giving more power to the panchayats, the local government, so that people, the basic idea that he had was that at that point of time, and maybe also at this point of time in the smaller parts of the country, people do not trust anyone, any outsider to govern them. So would that system work here for us if that were to be followed?
No, you may recall the amendment to the Constitution by the introduction of a new chapter relating to Panchayat Raj. See, that was the object of that amendment, Constitution amendment. It was to ensure that the power actually is slowly percolating down to a lower level. And that lowest level is the Panchayat Raj. And the Panchayats must be made very strong of local governance, so that in their areas, for example, if you go to a village now and you want to build a small house in a plot which is inside the village, right? It's not so difficult as in Bangalore city to go and get a plan sanctioned or an approved. There are some very simple rules. You have to apply and the Panchayat secretary will give you the plan. You want to build a school there, the block education officer will look at the plot and give you the approval. So what I'm saying is when it percolates down, but in Bangalore city, if you have to get a Kata certificate, it takes 3 months. If you have to get a plan sanctioned, depends on the area where you are building and the size of your plot. How much money you have to pay to whom is something, which is mind-boggling and shocking. Now, what I'm saying is this is because the governance level has, in a village, if a secretary of the village panchayat asks for money, there'll be other people in the village who will say, what is this you're doing? Why are you asking for this? And there'll be some social pressure on him or her to act according to law. Whereas the bigger these organizations take place, the more impersonal it becomes. To get I'm connected with many institutions. It's unbelievable that they just do not take any decision when deserving cases. In most deserving cases, they will not take a decision. Why? For collateral reasons. And nothing can be done about it. So this corruption and this nepotism and everything, is really too bad when the organization becomes bigger. But in smaller organizations, it is not so. But Indians, we have a habit here. The habit is don't follow any rule. If you say drive on the left side of the road, we always take pleasure in driving on the right side of the road. Swachh Bharat, we tell everybody, outside my house is a park. At least once in 2-3 days, I have to shout at somebody who's trying to, use it as a urinal. And all educated people. One man even had the gumption to tell my wife, is this your house? So she said, you must be ashamed being an old man and not following what we all have to follow. And after that, he stopped coming to that area. What I'm saying is, educated people, we just do not want to follow laws. So how much can it be enforced? So it is very, very important, for us to follow the law. I think we'll be doing a great service if you have some program by which we are able to educate road users. The more affluent a driver is, the more tendency of his to violate the law. And the minute, somebody stops you, you will start by, calling him names, and then you'll start from, Narendra bhai ko phone karu. That's where you start. I had an experience once. I was driving in Delhi. I was in Delhi for some time. I was driving near Parliament House, and there's a one-way street there. So I didn't notice it. My wife was in the car, and we were just talking, and I missed it and entered. As I entered, there's a police chowki there. He stopped me. So I pulled over and I stopped in the side. And I was not in uniform, or I was not in lawyer's dress or anything. He came to me. He said, "Sir, aap kidhar ja rahe?" I told him, "Main to ghar ja raha hu." Then license bataiye. I said, "Why? What happened?" "No, you're in no entry street." So I took off my license and I gave it to him. He looked at it. "ये तो इधर का नहीं है, बैंगलोर का है." I said, "हाँ, मैं बैंगलोर में रहता हूँ, ऐसा लाइसेंस तो उधर ही का है. तो आप इधर, ये दिल्ली का गाड़ी है." I said, "नहीं, मेरी गाड़ी है. I have one car here. I come to Supreme Court." And I told him, "गलती हो गई, मैंने देखा नहीं. But please tell me what is the amount payable. I will pay. No problem at all. It's my mistake. I made a mistake." This is what I told him. That fellow got shocked. He said, "Sir, अभी तक किसी ने मुझे ऐसा नहीं कहा कि उनका गलती हो गया है. आप वकील है और बोल रहे हैं कि आप वो जुर्माना जो देना है देना चाहते हैं आप." I told him, "Yes, I made a mistake. No, so I have to pay for it. What can I do? It's a mistake. I'm telling you, it's honestly a mistake. I didn't notice it." Then the man was extremely polite. "आप किधर रहते हैं, क्या करते हैं?" "What do you do?" he asked me. I said, "नहीं, मैं कोर्ट में काम करता हूँ." "कोर्ट में क्या करते?" I didn't want to tell him I'm a lawyer, that I done this, because it doesn't look nice, telling somebody I'm a lawyer. "What do you want to come and ask me?" So I told him, "नहीं, कोर्ट में काम नहीं, क्या काम करते?" Then I didn't want to hide it. I said, "No, I'm a lawyer. I appear in Supreme Court, so I come here." ऐसा है, ठीक है, आप संभाल के चलाइए सर, थोड़ा ये इतना ठीक नहीं है, माहौल ठीक नहीं है. He said, gave me the license back and sent me away. Why I'm giving you this example is, he told me that he has not met a single person who has spoken to him like that. If we make a mistake, we have to we have to own it up, no? And we should not make a mistake. We should ensure that we are on the right side of the law, no? If you are not in the right side of the law and you want to use all your influence, how can that be done? This is where I think we should please think of some kind of a small project. Whatever assistance you want from me, I'm willing to give you, to educate road users at every level. And to say that observance of law is most important for all of us. That, we should partner with the police and do something. Okay.
Beautifully explained, sir. And Trivikram, maybe we can think of something, making something, and Govind also.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that would be very
right. Also, I was also reminded of one of the incidents in Delhi where when an advocate made it an issue, an ego issue, when a police stopped him for not wearing a helmet. And the police wala said that, "Sir, 600 रुपए ही भर दो." उन्होंने चालान काट दिया था. So he said, "मैं 6000 भी भरूंगा, but चालान के लिए नहीं भरूंगा." So that becomes an ego issue. If you have made a mistake, just pay for it. Right. So moving on to the next question, sir. Mr. Sparsh has been asking for a while if you can explain in short BK versus Union of India. What was the case about?
Oh, honestly, I don't know.
All right, Sparsh,
I think sorry to interrupt, but very unfortunately today Justice D.K. Basu has just passed away a few hours ago.
Yeah.
So D.K. Basu's judgment is one of the it's a landmark judgment in criminal jurisprudence. I mentioned it because Justice has just passed away.
Like passed away, yeah. We would just give our condolences to his family also.
That's really sad. Such troubled times. So, can we go ahead?
After sir, would you like to finish? There are a lot of questions that are pouring in, sir. Your session has been great. What would you like to do, sir? If you are
maybe another 5 minutes or 10 minutes.
Or Raghav, how long will these questions take?
I think we'll just take questions which will long 10 minutes. We'll not take more than 10 minutes.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
All right. So, so one of the questions that we have from Mr. Alok Chaudhary is that, does the Honorable Supreme Court have the powers to frame uniform reservation systems in India?
Actually, Supreme Court does not frame any legislation, but it tries to fill up the gaps if the law has provided any gaps. Now, this creamy layer is something which is invented by the Supreme Court in the judgment, because they felt that the manner in which the reservation was being worked was not in consonance with the objective. So the Supreme Court can fashion things like, now in the COVID times, the Supreme Court and High Courts are fashioning different types of reliefs, asking, for a particular type of relief to be given and particular orders to be made as to how it should be tackled with like this, so they can only nudge the government towards achieving the constitutional rights of the parties. I don't think they can make any law as such, but judge-made law is what we call. The judge-made law, they can decide what exactly is to be done.
Right, sir.
Yes, sir.
So just one last question. Okay, someone has again asked for a judgment. So if there's someone, a team member from Lawyers Club India who's listening to this, we'll have the judgment summarized and sent to all the participants who have participated in this webinar. So we'll have the BK Pavitra also done and the other judgments also done. You can write it down in the chat. Sir, we'll take just the last question now. Just give me a second. So can you please tell a little about the economically weaker section quota which was created and inserted through 103 amendment, and which was totally against the social justice and very purpose of reservation, and also what is the difference between reservation and quota?
I think quota and reservation, reservation is a broader term. Reservation means that you can, by law, keep aside certain number of posts or seats for certain category of people. That is called reservation. Quota is the internal one. Inside that reserved category, how much should scheduled caste get, how much should scheduled tribes get, and other socially economically backward classes should get. That is what is the quota rule. Internally, inside that reserved category. So all the quotas put together will constitute the reservation. I think that's what it is. Now, this economically weaker sections, which was introduced in Article 16, Subarticle 6, it is again to enable the government to find out that among certain categories of people, one of the categories of people who require some kind of support and protection is the economically weaker section. Now, who is economically weaker section? They call this a BPL, no? Below poverty line is expression which we are all familiar with. No? BPL card holders, they say, below poverty line card holders. There is a particular benefit that is given to them. Like this, the economic line where to draw is something which is left to the states. So this new subarticle enables the creation of a separate category like this, but it restricts the number that you can reserve for them to 10% of what is done total. So it is a classification of a subcategory for the purpose of special protection based on the economic condition.
Thank you so much.
Questions? Any more questions, Raghav?
I think we are done with all the questions.
Okay, cool. I'll now move on to the thank you note. Hello, thank you, sir. I would just like to thank S.S. Naganan, Senior Advocate, for his extremely valuable presentation. Between his busy schedule, Sir has accepted our invitation to share his expertise. Then I'd like to thank all the audience members who have come on Facebook, on Zoom call, everyone here. It was an immensely good experience. Sir, thank you so much. And especially for the audience, thank you for coming also. I would like to thank Sri Vikram, sir, for arranging, and Mr. Raghav Arora, sir, for also arranging everything. And it was a great session, sir. This is going to be very good for the judicial aspirants. But on leaving this on a note is, we would like to communicate, all of us would like to communicate to D.K. Basu sir and his family that, our condolences. We've lost one of the great jurists today. So thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming, sir.
Thanks
Thank
to
you
all of you.
Thank you so much,
Bye.
everyone. We'll meet again on. For now, we have already planned 1 or 2 sessions with eminent jurists again, like sir, and we'll be notifying you through the WhatsApp groups, channels, and everywhere you are connected with us. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Enjoy the
Thank you,
weekend
sir. Thank you.
and the lockdown.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Stay safe and don't go out anywhere.
Yes, sir. We won't.
That's important.
Bye to all of you.